Good morning. I am Patricia Strickland, and I work for the Bureau of Exceptional Student Education at the Florida Department of Education. And today, I'm going to discuss Hospital Homebound. I am the liaison for the Hospital Homebound program in the Bureau of Exceptional Student Education. And if you have any questions at the end of the presentation, we'll have cards that we can pass out. You can fill them out for us, and I will take them back, and I will respond to your questions. Okay? So today we're going to discuss eligibility requirements for hospital homebound, evaluation of medical statements, the eligibility review process, development or revision of the individual education plan, other considerations that go into developing the plan, the reevaluation process, frequently asked questions that I see a lot within the Bureau. So hospital homebound eligibility. How do you know if your student is eligible for hospital homebound? What is hospital homebound? The definition for the purpose of this rule, it applies to homebound or hospitalized students. A homebound or hospitalized student is a student who is medically diagnosed physical or psychiatric condition that is acute, catastrophic in nature, a chronic illness, or a repeated intermittent illness due to persisting medical problems, and which confines the student to home or hospital and restricts activities for an extended period of time. What is the criteria for eligibility for the hospital homebound program? Eligibility requirements. The one thing that is different from other requirements within eligibility is that for hospital homebound, you need the medical piece. That's a very important part of the data that they will use to decide if your student is eligible for hospital homebound. So on the physician's report, it must indicate that the student is going to be absent due to a physical or psychiatric condition for at least 15 consecutive school days due to a chronic condition, is confined to the home or to the hospital, is under medical care for illness or injury that is acute, catastrophic, or chronic in nature. The student can receive instructional services without endangering the health and safety of the teacher or other students in which the teacher may come in contact with. Will be able to participate and benefit from an instructional program. So if a student is too ill to benefit from an instructional program, then the IEP team would need to reconvene to determine the best placement for that student, because in order for the student to become eligible for hospital homebound, the student must be able to benefit from instruction. Students who have been evaluated and deemed eligible by a group of qualified professionals for the hospital homebound program are considered students with a disability in the state of Florida, in accordance with Section 1003.01 of the Florida statutes. The parental agreement lets the district know that the parent or guardian is in agreement with the hospital homebound procedures as well as their cooperation with the program. And all the rules that you see up there, I've listed all of the eligibility categories for students. So instead of just saying all that, I just wanted you to be able to see that it says under, and this means if a student already has an IEP, has been found eligible in another area, they can still be on hospital homebound. Evaluation and medical statement for hospital homebound. When is an evaluation requested for hospital homebound eligibility, and what is important regarding that medical statement that I discussed earlier? Evaluations and medical statement for hospital homebound eligibility. If the student is being considered for hospital homebound services due to a psychiatric condition, the district may require an evaluation from a psychiatrist, but it is no cost to the parent. The district must pay for that. A psychologist or a counselor cannot sign the medical. It has to be a licensed physician. And the medical evaluation is only one piece to the data that the IEP team may use to qualify the student for hospital homebound. What must be included in the medical statement? A description of the disabling condition with any medical implications for instruction, a statement that the student is unable to attend school, a plan of treatment, recommendations regarding re-entry into school, and the estimated duration of the condition or prognosis. Who is qualified to sign the medical statement? The medical statement must be signed by a licensed physician, an advanced registered nurse practitioner, an ARNP, or a physician's assistant, a PA, working for a physician can sign the medical statement, but the name of the licensed physician must be on the medical, but his signature is not required if you're having a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant signing, as long as that licensed physician is on that medical. Homebound hospitalization eligibility review process. Students who may need hospital homebound must go through an eligibility review process. What is the eligibility review process? This can sometimes seem overwhelming for parents or students with disabilities. During the eligibility process for hospital homebound, the parents will be invited to an eligibility meeting where a staffing committee reviews the student data to determine if the student will meet eligibility for the hospital homebound program. The staffing committee is composed of a minimum of 3 professionals and the parent or guardian of the student being considered for the hospital homebound program. Eligibility determination. Hospital homebound services can be determined within 5 service options. The student may be on full-time hospital homebound. The student may be eligible for intermittent hospital homebound, where the student may go to school half days, every other day, other types of scheduling that the IEP team deems necessary in order to support that student during their medical flare-ups or during their medical situation, as well as receive services from the school. There's also reduced schedule, and that's where the student would only work on their core curriculum, because that is possibly all the student can handle while on hospital homebound. We find that our students that are on hospital homebound, some of them may be too ill. So the IEP team will work with the family and figure out something where they can provide, a schedule for that student to keep them on track for moving forward to the next grade. Virtual school. This is a good option for students on hospital homebound, but may not be the best option for all. One thing I want to make sure that everyone in the room understands is that a parent or guardian of the student is a very vital part of the IEP team and is part of making those decisions. So please, no, you are a part of that team, and you can share your concerns. You can and decisions can be made on things that you're bringing into the district. What if it is determined that my child is ineligible for hospital homebound? If the IEP does not find the student eligible, if the IEP team does not find the student eligible for hospital homebound, the district must provide the parent or guardian with a prior written notice of refusal. This is considered written informed consent of an ineligibility. The development or revision of the individual education plan. So after a student has been found eligible for hospital homebound, the next step is to develop an IEP. If the student is already eligible for another exceptionality, then the IEP must be revised to show the hospital homebound services. Who serves on the IEP team? If you have a student with a disability, you're already aware of this, but if you're a gen ed parent and your student is ill, this is the process for students with IEPs. The parent or guardian must be in attendance, 1 general education teacher of the student, 1 special education teacher who will provide the hospital homebound services for the student, a representative of the school district who is qualified to provide or supervise the provision of specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs, or knowledgeable about the availability of resources in the school district. And it's very important that that person is at the IEP team meeting, because that person can tell you what services the district has for students that are on hospital homebound. So it needs to be someone knowledgeable within the district of what services can be provided. Other individuals who have knowledge or expertise regarding the student, and the student beginning the student's 14th birthday to consider service transition needs. Development or revision of the IEP. If the student did not have an IEP prior to hospital homebound eligibility, an IEP will need to be developed for the student. If the student already was found eligible with a disability when the student, then the IEP must be revised to reflect the changes of the IEP and now include those services within the IEP for hospital homebound. At that time, the IEP team will include the strengths of the student, the parent or guardian's concerns for the student's academic progress, the results of the initial or most recent evaluation for the student, and in this case, part of the data that is used, like I've said before, is the medical statement. That is data. Special factors to consider for the IEP. The IEP team must also consider the special factors that could affect the student while in the hospital homebound program. Behavior that impedes the student's learning, limited English proficiency, Braille instruction for students who are blind or visually impaired, communication needs, and assistive technology and devices and services that may assist the student while on the hospital homebound program. Related services for hospital homebound. If the student needs therapy services that are directly related to the recovery of a surgery, the district is not required to provide medical-related therapies. Hospital homebound services are based on educational needs only. General education students with an IEP for hospital homebound. If the student is a general education student, the physician's statement should include the estimated time of need for hospital homebound services. The IEP team will use this information to dictate the end of service date. If the student is expected to make a full recovery, they may include in the IEP that the student does not need transition services during the duration of the IEP that they have developed. If the illness or injury prohibits the student from returning to the general education without special education services, the IEP team may determine that a full transition plan will be developed before the student returns to school. What is required to be on the IEP? A statement of the student's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance to include how the student's disability affects the student's involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. The IEP team does this to show everyone who may assist with that student in knowing where the student is academically as well as their present level of functioning. A statement of measurable annual goals. These goals are developed to assist the student to be successful in areas in which they may struggle. A statement of the specially designed instruction, related services, and supplementary aids and services needed for the student to be involved and make progress in the general education environment. These services are provided to the student to ensure access of the general education curriculum so that the student can meet the educational standards that apply to all students. An explanation of the extent to which the student will not be able to participate in the hospital homebound program. Hospital homebound is considered one of our most restrictive environments. It is the goal that all students are able to participate with peers without disabilities. In the hospital homebound setting, the students are not with peers. An explanation is required to demonstrate why the student is not with peers. What is also required to be on the IEP? A statement of any allowable individual accommodations that are necessary to measure the academic and functional performance of the student on state or district assessments. Students with disabilities need accommodations to provide the student support to be successful in the general education environment. The projected date of the beginning of the hospital homebound services, accommodations, and modifications, and the anticipated frequency, location, and durations of the services. A statement of how the student's progress will be measured and how the student's parent or guardian will be informed of the process. I would like to look at bullet number 2 again. One thing that with the hospital homebound rule, it is supposed to be a temporary placement while that student is ill or suffering from a chronic condition. We do realize that there are conditions that are lifelong, but the big thing is that we do try to get them out of the hospital homebound if the district can provide services to that student once the student is at a place to return to the brick and mortar. What is required, another to be continued, what is required on the IEP? During the 8th grade year or the school year of the student's 14th birthday, a statement of the student's transition needs and desired post-school outcome. Students with disabilities begin working on post-school supports when the student turns 14 to assist with post-school outcomes after graduation. Beginning the student's 16th birthday, appropriate measurable post-secondary goals based on age-appropriate transition assessments related to training, education, employment, and where appropriate, independent living skills, and the transition services, including the course of study, needed to assist the student in reaching those goals. This is a much deeper dive into the post-school outcome supports for students with disabilities. Beginning at least 1 year before the student's 18th birthday, a statement that the student will be informed of his or her rights under Part B of the IDEA, and that these rights will transfer from the parent to the student upon reaching 18 years of age. Students are legal adults at the age of 18, and just like everything else, their rights transfer to them, including their educational rights. Other considerations. We have a few other things to discuss for hospital homebound that are services that can be provided. This is in regards to This is in regards to private school students. For hospital homebound, a student must be enrolled in a public K-12 school district to receive hospital homebound services. The exception to this is when a private school student has already been evaluated and determined eligible by a school in a school district in the state of Florida. If a private school student enrolls in a public school to receive hospital homebound services and are on the McKay Scholarship, the student will lose the scholarship for the time that they are on the hospital homebound program. Continuation of services. If the student is chronically ill or has a repeated intermittent illness, an annual medical examination and medical report is required from the physician in order for the student to remain on hospital homebound. The administrator for the ESE director, the administrator or the ESE director can request a more frequent medical report than just annually, but it is required annually once a year to receive that medical report for the student. Extended school year services. According to Section 34 of the Code of Federal Regulations 300.106, ESY services are special education and related services required by a student's individual education plan, an IEP, and provide students with and provided beyond the school term. A school district is required to provide ESY services to a student when the student requires such services to receive a free and appropriate public education. ESY services must be considered by the IEP team at least annually and must be provided if deemed necessary by the team. ESY services provide specially designed instruction and related services to a student with a disability beyond the normal school year in accordance with the student's IEP and at no cost to the parent. This is Rule 6A-6.03028 of the Florida Administrative Code. The IEP team may use criteria to determine whether a student requires ESY services. These are, but not limited to, the following factors: regression and recoupment, critical points of instruction, emerging skills, nature and or the severity of the disability, interfering behaviors that may stop the student, rate of progress, and special circumstances. Students on hospital homebound may also need ESY services if they've missed a lot of school due to their illness. The reevaluation process for hospital homebound students. Students with disabilities are considered for reevaluation every 3 years. If the student is in the hospital homebound program during the 3-year evaluation year, The IEP team must review the existing data, review evaluations, and information from the parent or the guardian. At this time, based on the review, the IEP team will make the decision if there is a need for additional data. Also, if there is additional data needed, the district must obtain informed parental consent before the district begins evaluating the student. If the team determines there is not a need for additional data, the district must notify the parent of the decision and give them the reasons why no additional data is needed. For a student who is ill, it may be more appropriate to conduct the reevaluation process based on a review of existing data and defer formal testing to a later time to when the student has recovered and can re-enter into the brick and mortar. Dismissal procedures. Dismissal often occurs when it is determined that a student is no longer eligible or in need of special education services. Before dismissing a student from all ESE programs, the IEP team must have a reevaluation to determine whether the student continues to be a student with a disability, the educational needs of the student, the present level of academic achievement and related developmental needs of the student, and whether the student continues to need special education and related services. Change in placement. The term dismissal is not used for students with disabilities who are continuing with an IEP to receive specialized instruction services in another placement. This is considered a change of placement, also known as a free and appropriate public education. If the student is a student with a disability and is returning to school, an IEP team meeting is held to reflect the discontinuation of the hospital homebound services and reinstatement of the specialized instruction and related services the student will receive upon the student's return to school. Title 34 of the Code of Federal Regulations 300.503 and Rule 6A-6.03311 of the Florida Administrative Code, they indicate that written notice must be given to the parents of the child with a disability a reasonable amount of time before the district proposes to initiate or change the identification, evaluation, or educational placement of the child, or the provision of FAPE to the child. The parent is provided a prior written notice of the proposed change, including the cessation of the hospital homebound services. So these are some of the frequently asked questions that I get from parents at the Bureau. Must students be absent from school for 3 weeks before they can apply for hospital homebound services? No. The physician must indicate that the estimated duration of absence from school will be 3 weeks or more. Is a pregnant student eligible for hospital homebound services? Possibly. Rule 6A-6.03020 of the Florida Administrative Code does not address pregnancy, childbirth, or recovery from childbirth. Pregnancy and recovery from childbirth are not considered medical conditions that meet eligibility for the hospital homebound services unless the student experiences medical complications that meet the criteria for the hospital homebound rule. The eligibility criteria for participation in the hospital homebound program, it's the same for all of our students. Our students who have concerns related to emotional health eligible for hospital homebound. Yes. If the emotional problems result in the student's inability to attend school for the specified amount of time as stated in the state board rule, for a student who is being considered for hospital homebound due to a psychiatric condition, the district may require that an evaluation be conducted by a psychiatrist. This would be at no cost to you. A report by a psychologist or counselor does not qualify as a medical report. The school counselor can't give it, a psychologist, it has to be an MD, psychiatrist for this particular situation. Does the evaluation form signed by a licensed physician automatically qualify the student eligible for the hospital homebound program? No. That is just one piece of the data that they're using. It's a required piece, but it's just one piece of the data they use to determine eligibility. The evaluation by a licensed physician represents student assessment data to be considered by the staffing committee to determine whether to recommend eligibility for hospital homebound services. The staffing committee may request additional information regarding the educational implications of the medical condition for the student. May an evaluation from a chiropractic physician be used to determine eligibility for the hospital homebound program? No. The physician must be a medical doctor or an osteopathic physician licensed under sections 458 and 459 of the Florida statutes. If a student has related services identified on the IEP, must the related services be provided to the student while the student is on hospital homebound? Yes, a student who is served in the hospital homebound program must be provided with related services if the following criteria has been met. The student is determined to be a student with a disability eligible for such services, and the IEP team determines that these services are necessary to provide the student with FAPE. Is the IEP team required to include occupational therapy, physical therapy, or any other related services in the hospital homebound student's IEP if the parent requested? The key word there is if the parent requested. No. Related services are defined broadly under the Individuals with Disability Act, Educational Act, the IDEA, and can include a variety of services, including transportation, developmental corrective, and other supportive services. To be included on the IEP, the team must determine that the student requires those services to benefit from special education. May the IEP team revise the services identified on the initial hospital homebound IEP? Yes. The special education and related services identified on the IEP are what the student with a disability needs to access the general education curriculum. If those needs change because of a change in educational placement, the IEP team is justified in changing those services. The IEP team may decide that the previously determined services are not appropriate due to the student's current medical condition. Can a student receive hospital homebound services, be enrolled in 2 districts at the same time? This can get a little confusing, and if you have questions regarding this, please feel free to fill out one of our cards in the back before you leave, and I will contact you. A student may be enrolled in 2 districts at the same time. Students who are chronically ill or intermittently ill, whose conditions necessitate frequent placement in hospital homebound, may be alternately assigned to the school-based and the hospital homebound program, even when these are located in different school districts, and move from one to the other as needed. These students do not have to be withdrawn and re-enrolled each time they switch from one district to another. What we really want to happen is a seamless transition between the districts for the student. If a student remains on hospital homebound from one year to the next, must a new eligibility staffing be held? No, you do not have to go through the eligibility staffing committee again. The HH rule does require that a medical evaluation be provided annually. This information should be obtained in advance of the student's annual review for the hospital homebound program, because you don't want the student to have, during the IEP team meeting, you want to make sure you have all that data, otherwise they're going to have to come back and meet again. And that medical piece is part of the data. If a student from out of state is admitted to a psychiatric facility in Florida, may this student be placed on hospital homebound? Yes, the student must enroll in a Florida public school first. The district may work with the psychiatric facility to assist with school enrollment of the student. However, if an out-of-state student has been placed in a facility by a local education agency, the LEA, in another state, then the student would be enrolled in, then the student would not be enrolled in a Florida public school. The LEA in the other state would then be responsible to work with the facility to provide FAPE. If a student who has Progress Monitoring Plan, a PMP, or a 504 plan becomes eligible for hospital homebound services, does an IEP need to be developed? Yes. The purpose of the Progress Monitoring Plan is to assist the student in meeting state and district expectations for proficiency or promotion in reading, writing, mathematics, or science. The purpose of a 504 plan is to provide accommodations within the general education environment and to allow eligible students an equal opportunity to participate. A student may have both a PMP and a 504 plan. As noted above, the student would now be considered a student with a disability, and an IEP would need to be developed. The content of these plans should be considered. That would be part of the data that we're talking about for the staffing committee. And the content of these plans should be considered in order to develop the IEP for the hospital homebound services for the student. Resources. I have pulled together a lot of resources that you may or may not benefit from, so I'll go really slow so you can take a picture of it or however you want to handle it. So we also have a Parent's Introduction to Exceptional Student Education in Florida. This is very beneficial for students that have not been found eligible for a disability and the student is coming on as a hospital homebound student. That would be a great resource because you're new to special education and the services. Developing Quality Individual Education Plans, a guide for instructional personnel and families. The reason why we say in families, it's very important that you know what services are out there for students for hospital homebound so that you can advocate for your student to make sure that they are provided with the necessary services for that student to be successful in the general education environment. Accommodations, assisting students with disability. Another great resource. It lists all the accommodations that can be provided on an IEP. It doesn't mean the student will qualify for those services, but what they'll do is they'll take that data and they will, upon the data, decide what accommodations the student would need to help the student continue to be successful. On the website for the Bureau, there is Hospital Homebound Resources, and that is the Hospital Homebound website. There's also on that website, it is the hospital homebound rule is included so that you can also read the rule and see how it's written so that you go into the meeting kind of knowing what it's about. And then policies and procedures are always a big one. You can pull up your district that you're in and you can look at your district's policies and procedures if they have been approved for this year and see what they say about hospital homebound. It has its own section. Exceptional student education. This is just it's all of our eligibility. It's the ESE page for the Florida Department of Education. The Bureau of Exceptional Student Education, the BEAS Resource and Information Center, we used to call that BRIC, but that's where you could find all types of resources for students with disabilities. Publications and presentations, we also have a hub for that. ESE policies and procedures. Oh, I'm sorry. I made a little bit of a mistake. This is the SPMP where you can look at districts, what we have approved at the state level for districts to do for each eligibility criteria and their policies behind it. And then the B's discretionary projects. We encourage you to ask your district, when you get on this list, if you see that there's something that one of your students would benefit from, please contact your district. We have so many projects that are out there and available to assist for free. These are provided at no cost to you. So you want to look into our projects to see if there's any of the projects that would benefit your student in the hospital homebound program. This is my contact information. I'm responsible for hospital homebound, other health impaired, and specific learning disability. So if you have any questions regarding any of those three areas, please fill out one of those cards for me and we will collect them in the back, or you can stop by our booth in the exhibition area and you can drop it in our box. And we take that box home and we divvy it out to all the program specialists so that you'll get the specialist that is responsible for that area. Okay? Well, thank you all very much for attending. I know it was a little short, but if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send that card, drop it in the box for me, or email me now that you have my email address and say, hey, Ms. Strickland, this is what we've got going on. I will then schedule a call so we can discuss your concerns. Thank you very much for having me today, and I hope that I've given you a little bit more information about hospital homebound that you did not have before. Yes, sir.